Welcome back everyone to the second and last part of Planar Reflection series. In this part, you will learn how to use the reflection camera to render planar reflections. The objective of the next step is to render the reflected scene into the floor. We first have to create a render target for our reflection camera. Now, go to Render Reflection and set the render target of the reflection camera. If you remember, we already disabled the reflection camera, which means that if we want to render the scene using this camera, we have to call render manually. This gives us more control over when we want to render the camera. Go to the start function and create the render target. The first two parameters are the render target dimensions. Let's use the screen dimensions. The third parameter is the number of bits in the depth buffer. If we also want to use the stencil buffer, we have to set this value to 24. Go to Unity and click Run. You can see that the camera is now rendering to a texture. Let's now see how to show the render target on screen. Create a new material. Name it Floor. Create a new unlit shader and assign it to the floor material. Rename main text to reflection text and remove unnecessary code. Go to planarreflectionmanager.cs. Add a new variable, name it floor material. This variable will hold a reference to the floor material we have just created. Go to Unity and assign the floor material to this variable. Let's now add the logic to draw a full screen quad. Create a new function called drawQuad. By using the methods from the class GL, we will be able to create our own mesh by setting the vertices and texture coordinates manually. Here we are telling Unity to draw a quad, which means that we have to set 4 vertices using GL vertex tree. And 4 texture coordinates using GL text core 2. We also have to set the material we want to use to draw the quad. The material only has one pass, so set this value to 0. We want to use the render target as texture. called draw. As you see, we are now drawing the render target to the screen. The textured full screen quad is hiding the original scene. What we have to do to get mirror reflection is to limit the area we are drawing to the floor. This is where the stencil buffer comes into play. Create a new material, name it floor stencil. Create a new surface shader and assign it to the material. Assign the material to the floor and set the texture. Open floor stencil.shader. This shader will be used to draw the floor and also to fill in the stencil buffer. In order to fill in the stencil buffer correctly and to avoid drawing reflection on top of opaque objects, we have to draw the floor last. To do that, set Q to geometry +1. This means that we will draw all opaque objects before drawing the floor. Add the code to fill in the stencil area occupied by the floor by 1. Go now to floor shader. Add the code that will first check if the value in the stencil buffer is equal to 1 before drawing. We do that by setting ref to 1 and camp to equal. Go to Unity and run. Congratulations on creating planar reflection effect. Let's see now how to control the reflectivity of the surface. The idea is to blend between the floor and the reflection. The reflection is controlled by floor shader. It's what we draw using the full screen quad. Let's open this shader and set the render type to transparent. Set the blend mode to alpha blend. This is done by using these settings. We can now control the transparency of the reflection using the alpha channel of the reflection texture. Let's set this value to 0.5 for now. This value means that the reflection will be half transparent. Open floor stencil shader and set the alpha to 0.5. What we created now is a half reflective surface. Let's check Unity. Let's now add the possibility to control the reflectivity of the surface. Open floor shader. Create a new variable and name it reflection factor. Replace the hard-coded reflection factor with this variable. The surface will be completely reflective when the value of this variable equals to 1 and not reflective at all when the value equals to 0. Open floor stencil.shader. Create a new variable, name it reflection factor. Make sure that the name matches the one we created in floor.shader. Floor.shader control the material of the floor. When the surface is completely reflective, we don't want to show the floor texture, which means that the alpha has to be set to 0. When the surface is non-reflective, we have to set the alpha to 1. To mimic this behavior, we have to set the alpha to 1 minus reflection factor. Now go to Planar Reflection Manager and create a new variable, name it reflection factor. set the range of this variable to 0 as min and 1 as max. Go to the update function and assign the value of this variable to the corresponding variables in the shaders. Go to Unity. You can now control the reflectivity of the surface. This is the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching and see you next time.